I think my recommendation to everyone who's been this for like years is the most important thing in designing your Martech stack is designing for change. Because whatever you think you need today, you can be pretty sure there's going to be some other new requirement or some other thing you're going to want to do 2 years from now. And it's impossible for you to predict what that thing is going to be, but something's going to come.
When I ran my first marketing department, we only had a handful of tech tools to choose from. I was thinking about the Martech stack I was using in 2012, and it consisted of WordPress, Google Analytics, MailChimp, Facebook Ad Manager, Mixpanel Hotjar, Hootsuite, and Moz. Fast forward to today, and the Martech landscape has absolutely exploded. We've seen the number of Martech vendors go from 150 in the 2010s to over 11,000 now. It's something like 37% growth in the number of vendors per year. So if we were comparing the Martech industry to a startup, it would be in hyper growth phase for over 15 years. And just when we thought things were cooling off a little bit, AI comes along and completely flips the script. So how should marketers navigate the expanding vendor options? Where should we be putting our money? And how is AI changing the marketing landscape? I'm Benjamin Shapiro, and to make some sense of the expanding Martech landscape, today I'm talking with Scott Brinker. Scott has been mapping out the Martech terrain for over a decade. As the VP of Platform Ecosystems at HubSpot, the editor of the Chief Martech blog, and the godfather of the Martech industry, he can see the Martech chessboard like no one else in the world. And I'm excited to have him here today. Scott, welcome back to the Martech podcast.
Thank you for the very kind intro, Benjamin. It's great to be here with you.
It's really always an honor to have you on the podcast. I think we get you for an hour like once a year, and every year there's something that is new and different. And this year is no change. Let's start off. We're going to start at the top. We're talking about Martech landscape. And I want you to give us a little history lesson here. Give us an overview of the history of the Martech landscape.
Sure. As you mentioned, we did the first landscape. Officially, it was in 2011, and it had about 150 technologies on it, which at the time, 150 logos, was, my goodness, there's like way too much Martech. Surely this whole thing's going to consolidate. And frankly, the whole reason I put that together wasn't because I had a fetish for putting little logos on a PowerPoint slide. It was my broader mission at the time was trying to persuade chief marketing officers that they were becoming more and more dependent on technology to execute their strategies and their visions. And that as a result, you should probably think about hiring some more like technical talent as part of the team, that this is investing in what we now have come to see as marketing operations and Martech. And so I originally just put that slide together to give people a sense of just look at this. And actually, when you step back and you're like, yeah, I have a tool in that category and a tool in that category. Even you, when you were starting out here, like saying, I had my very simple Martech stack, but you like listed like 6 things and it's okay, wow. And so I think it had the effect. Like a lot of people were surprised. And then we kept updating the landscape year over year just to like, all right, what's new this year? And I think that's where it went to crazy town. Almost right away. It was pretty much year over year for those first few years. It was basically doubling. I go from 150 to 300, and then we skipped a year, and all of a sudden it was 1,000, and then 2,000. And again, throughout this whole thing, I think it caught me by surprise as much as anyone else. Like, I would not have predicted this. I certainly wouldn't have signed up for like being the guy to put little logos on a slide if you told me you're going to have to deal with 14,000 of those things someday, buddy.
Yeah, you didn't know that the slide was going to have to get bigger and bigger. Hopefully everybody has a big enough screen to fit 11,000 logos on at once. It hasn't always been up into the right. I know that there was that sort of exponential growth initially. Do you think that there were phases in Martech growth?
Yeah, and certainly it did start to level out. I would say sometime when we crossed like the 5,000 mark, it stopped doubling, but it was still growing 30%, 20%, but you had the sense of leveling out. In fact, for a number of years, we kept asking ourselves, okay, is this going to be the year of peak Martech? And part of this is people always ask, wait a second, doesn't this stuff consolidate? And yes, Yes, it does. In fact, actually, if you go back to that original 2011 landscape, the vast majority of the companies that were on that landscape have either been acquired or gone out of business or pivoted in some, so like if you just sort of look back and compare, you're like, yeah, absolutely, that consolidated. And even today, like we continue to have a very robust M&A practice that happens around Martech and AdTech. The challenge is there are the very natural forces that you would expect consolidating this on one side of the equation, just because the barriers to entry in creating software have like asymptotically dropped to zero. Like the ability for more and more people to like say, oh, I have an idea, let me build something and get it out in market. And you could say like, well, yeah, but just because you build it doesn't mean they will come. But here's where it gets tricky is there is a demand side to this as well. That marketing continues to just go through this incredible like evolution of people are constantly trying to find the new tactic, or how do I get this more optimized thing here? Or, oh my goodness, there's this new channel and what are people doing in TikTok and how do I engage with that? And so marketers do always feel the need to be like innovating and like finding new ways to get things done. And so that matched up with this environment where, hey, anybody can build some software. You still have this just influx that kept
Yeah.
happening.
It's funny. I think of it as initially there was that first wave, let's call it the 2010s, where software was hard to develop. So people had to have real business cases. So you got the development of these large platforms. I think of Marketo and Salesforce and HubSpot, and all of the sort of ecosystem type plays, which eventually became larger and larger. They were really solving a true concrete, like platform size business problem. And over the time, as you mentioned, the software development got easier. And so then we saw more point solutions, which kind of explains that initial meteoric rise. No code solutions came out, and all of a sudden we just had this proliferation. It seems like people stopped being able to find as many point solutions. But then all of a sudden now we're seeing this huge uptick. Platform, point solutions. What phase are we in now?
It's a really great point is we went from a world where sort of all these things were like independent little pieces out there in the world and good luck figuring out how to get them all together, to there was definitely an era that we went in starting around 2015, 2016, 2017, where a lot of the major MarTech platforms stopped trying to ignore this and instead said like, how do we harness this? How do we actually create ecosystems and like we can have our marketplaces and our stores and we can make it really easy then for our customers. Yes, we'll sell them as much as we can out of our portfolio, but if they need something else, hey, we have this ecosystem. And in many ways that did actually find a good way to help everyone. Like for the major MarTech vendors, it now was a good way to augment anything that they didn't do natively. For those point solutions, they now had a channel to the market. For more of the marketers who were acquiring this stuff, if something was in somebody's marketplace and you were a primary user of that platform, you're like, okay, this thing has gone through a certain vetting. It has a certain amount of out-of-the-box integration. And so that was where we were leveling out. What has happened in these past couple years is just when we thought we'd reached an equilibrium there, if you can call 10,000, 11,000 products in equilibrium, sort of scary.
Slower growth, at least.
Yes, I really did think it was, we had achieved peak MarTech. But then AI. And AI, like we've seen something like 3,000 new products in the MarTech space in just over the past 18 months. Again, the vast majorities, these being very small products, although not all of them. And it's now this, again, like it's that perfect storm where on the supply side, AI has accelerated a whole bunch of people building a whole bunch of new things. But also on the demand side, like marketers feel the pressure of, okay, this is a new technological wave. This is going to change what's possible. Boy, I better be like figuring out what I can get and use that's going to help me achieve that. And so we're in another, I don't know if bubble's the right word because, it almost implies, is it not sustainable? And I honestly don't know, but we're definitely in a uptick phase here where the volume of things coming to market is much larger than it had been for a while.
So let's talk a little bit about this. Based on what you've seen before, where we're seeing this sort of explosive growth in MarTech app and vendor development, in this age of artificial intelligence, I think one of the big questions is how many of these vendors and these tools are actually going to have staying power? What is the sort of progression that you've seen from some of the other eras of Martech that we might be able to use to predict what's going to happen with this AI revolution?
I think the fundamental mental shift here is we were used to thinking of software as actually a relatively capital intensive proposition that would naturally converge to having very large vendors consolidate everything. And that wasn't just a Martech. That was pretty much in every software category. Like, that's just how we treated software working. And if you were a startup, the only reason you were a startup was because someday you hope to become a multi-billion-dollar company or get acquired by a multi-billion-dollar company. With the proliferation of software that's happening, one of the things that's changed is that's not the only business model. You've got now a ton of people who, like, let's just take, for instance, like service providers, who again, classically, oh, you're either a software company or you're a services company. Turns out, no, people are all sorts of hybrids now. And so you have services companies that they build a specialized app that really captures their secret sauce, and they either use it as a way to optimize client engagements, or they use it as, sort of bait to, like, oh, hey, we'll put this really useful thing out there, and then as people use that, we'll try and get them on as clients. And those are very different business models. They have no expectation that software is going to grow to become a billion-dollar software at some point. It's never going to get acquired by a Salesforce, an Adobe, a Microsoft, a HubSpot. You've got a whole bunch of small indie developers that, hey, listen, if I create this app and people love it and they use it and I make $1 million a year off of this, oh my God, this is the perfect business model. Why would I do anything else? The things that had been barriers to that was the degree to which we could get this stuff to integrate. And as just platform ecosystems have made it easier for those things to integrate. And I think you look at a lot of what's happening with AI, where AI agents are coming up with, frankly, even easier models to have things integrate together. I think I think the market of total software in marketing is going to be massive. It's still going to be probably a relatively small number of companies that become big multi-million-dollar, 100 million, billion-dollar companies. That's just the math. There's only going to be a small number of those. But a lot of these smaller ones, I think there's going to be a proliferation of them for a long time. And there's a twist on this too. If you keep extrapolating that out, what you really do is at some point you cross the line and you're like, wait a second, why am I buying somebody else's software at all? These AI tools, I tell it what I want and it's able to create these things for me on the fly. Why do I even need to buy any of these things? Why don't I'll create more of my own custom software? Hey, here's what I want this thing to do. And we're starting to see that happen. And then you get into this weird place. You're like, obviously, if you create a piece of software just for your own self, it doesn't make any sense for me to put it on the Martech landscape. But when you think about what companies would actually be using and what's going to be in their stack and how they're going to operate, I think you're going to see a ton of those things.
Yeah, it's funny. You're like getting right to the heart. And mostly for my business, I was like, we're a media production company. But I think what makes us different is our usage of technology. What's I call it podcast OS, but the infrastructure and the rules and the Marteching. It's the Monday boards that connect to Zapier, that connect to GPT and Claude, that feed it back through Cast Magic. And all of a sudden I'm networking all of these tools together. And it's funny that sometimes you're not even building software. Like, to create a technology tool, you're really just stacking together some of these other ones. And now with artificial intelligence, tools like Replit, where it's like, how do I copy this crazy infrastructure that we've built to make it easier to produce high quality media? I'm just going to tell a AI agent to read my rules and copy it. I actually see this. Now we don't go exponential. Now we just go straight up in terms of the number of actual MarTech tools that are out there, because, or soon, it'll just be natural language that allows us to create it. It is literally zero development skills required to build a new technology application, which to me is astounding.
And again, in all fairness, I think it will be the full spectrum. You are going to have some very large technology companies that have some of these foundational platforms and systems we use. If you're using Replit, Replit's a software company. Is it a MarTech software company? I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily frame it that way, but if a bunch of people are using it for MarTech, I guess, all right. You are going to have a bunch of these prepackaged things where someone develops something that's novel, that works in a great way, and hey, for $100 a month, why not? And then, you're going to have this, in fact, we used to call all those little MarTech apps, we used to refer to it as the long tail. And like this next generation of all this custom driven software, I've started calling it the hypertail, because it really is. It's just orders of magnitude more of individual things. And yeah, I think you look at a world not too far away where Martech stacks are a mix of all three of those kinds of things, but increasingly, just the way you described, the way you've set the operating system for your business, that more and more companies are going to feel like, listen, I'm not going to do things the way Salesforce or Adobe or HubSpot or Microsoft told me I should do them. I'm going to do it the way I want my business to actually work. And hey, I'll use those platforms. They'll be a part of my equation here, but they're less of the, you are the architect of your digital operations. You're the architect of your customer experience.
I think it raises an interesting question about investment. So with this hypertail, we still have these large platforms. There's your point solutions. How do marketing leaders, how do the CMOs think about allocating their tech investment today when there are so many different options and ways to allocate their budget?
Most of them actually don't have a tremendous amount of choice on that in the short term, right? Like you have most businesses at any scale now have an existing Martech stack. They have a bunch of existing like operations. And as they look at how this is going to evolve over the next few years, they're going to bring in some other things. They're starting to use things like Replit to build more custom software. But they've got so much of their current operations on these existing platforms that doesn't get turned off overnight. So it's like the discretionary budget in marketing technology, I still think is pretty small. I think my recommendation to everyone is, in fact, it's been this for like years, is the most important thing in designing your Martech stack is designing for change. Because whatever you think you need today, you can be pretty sure there's going to be some other new requirement or some other thing you're going to want to do 2 years from now. And it's impossible for you to predict what that thing is going to be. Something's going to come. And so the pressure you need to put both on your vendors, but also the architect of your Martech stack, is every time we make a choice of which vendor we're going to go with or how we're going to construct something, are we doing it in a way that is giving us openness and optionality for the future? And I think this is why you see these stats like the Martech org folks, they run that annual Martech replacement survey. And okay, people decide to kick some of their old software to the curb. I'm going to do an RFP here to get a new marketing automation platform or a new CRM. But what's important to me, boy, like way up at the top of the list here is, okay, how easy is it to integrate? How open is the data? Does it have the APIs? Because again, independent of even evaluating what I need it to do today, I know that optionality of being able to connect other things to it in the future is going to make a huge difference. And it's going to make my future self a lot happier rather than like, oh, I've just ended up in a dead end that, you know, I've got a gun to my head and I have a 3-year migration before I'll ever be able to change anything.
Hang on a second. The CMO's only in the job for 18 months, so you don't need that much optionality because you're probably getting shit canned. Anyway, kidding aside, when you talk about optionality, is that like flexibility in terms of your core platforms, your HubSpot, your Salesforce, your CRM, your CDP, like the basic table stakes you need to run a modern MarTech stack, being able to integrate into other places? Or is it more of a factor of contract terms and business relationships? I basically what I'm asking is like, how do you actually build optionality when you need some pillars to build off of, but you want to be able to be flexible enough to change?
It's a spectrum, and the more foundational a platform is going to be in your stack, when you make that choice, that is a choice that you're probably going to have to live with for quite some time. And so people don't often change their CRM, or they don't often change their marketing automation platform. Although, frankly, as I say that, they change it more frequently than you might imagine. And
but
again,
it's painful. Like those.
It is painful. But here's the thing.
It's so hard.
Here's the thing, is at any point in time, you've reached the decision point where you're like, we're going to switch to a different CDP, CRM, map, pick your 3-letter acronym of choice. Yeah. At the moment in time, you've decided, no, we're biting the bullet. We're moving to something else. Evaluating the vendor choices for, okay, what is the openness and the flexibility of that platform moving forward? That's where it becomes a top criteria. And the good news is a lot of vendors have gotten the message. Like, they recognize this is now a criteria that buyers are ranking higher and higher. And again, it takes a little while sometimes for this feedback loop to connect, but you've seen that products have invested more and more with integrations. And again, even now, like this generation of new AI native tools, boy, a bunch of them almost treat like being able to integrate to any API service or any data source as just like table stakes. Of course you can do that. It's hard to
Yeah.
remember that wasn't the case that many years ago.
There's an interesting dichotomy here with when you're starting the vendor relationships of like, to earn the business, we're going to give you as much optionality as flexibility as we can. On the flip side, that also means that you're more likely to leave. And so I wonder how that plays out with the larger vendors of like, yeah, we'll give you optionality as a CDP, but the reason why people don't change their CDP is A, it's a pain in the butt, and B, those are longer term contracts, which don't generally, traditionally provide a ton of optionality.
Well, and again, I think this is why you've seen people like push back. There's some data, I could track it down, of the average software contract length. And for a while, it was trending up to these 3-year contracts. And in the past couple of years, you've actually seen that now slide back where it's very unusual to sign a contract that's longer than 1 year. Because again, I think just a lot of people are like, boy, I really don't know what the world's going to look like 3 years from now. You have to start with the assumption that people buy software because they actually have a genuine need. And if they can have a software product that fulfills that and does a great job with that, actually people develop a lot of loyalty to products like, oh, I love that product. It just works so well for me. And so the only time I think you get people like even by default wanting to think about migrating off of a product is when they're like, this just isn't doing what I need anymore, or they're not adapting to like the new world, or hey, wow, they keep raising the price on every renewal, but I don't see what I'm getting for that price relative to now a bunch of other products that are at a lower price point. And so it's almost like the default is people are going to stick with stuff that does what they need and they love. And I think to the degree a software company keeps that as their primary focus, their ability to like win and retain customers is so much better than, boy, if your game plan for how we're going to conquer the world is we're going to lock people into these draconian contracts and then milk them for, 20 years. You might want to rethink whether or not that strategy is actually going to play out the way you want.
It's funny. I'm the producer of a podcast called the SaaS Business Podcast, and the company that Maxio is the company that is hosting the podcast. And a lot of what we talk about in that show is the business models. And there was an interesting piece of data that companies are moving towards these hybrid business models where there's a lower subscription, shorter terms, but then in addition to the subscription, there's usage-based models, which is another way to provide people the optionality. It's not just in the length of the term, it's your adoption. It provides predictable revenue because you got some subscription, but when people are using the service, you get a little extra coin, everybody walks away happy, builds those happy relationships. It seems not only are we seeing this need for optionality in terms of the vendor contract relationships and terms, but also with how SaaS businesses are being priced.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love it. I think from an alignment perspective, usage-based billing is a wonderful thing. I think the only thing that's probably made it a little bit slower to get the adoption at scale is there are some disciplines and practices that are very comfortable with that. Anyone who's using AWS services or even cloud data, like they're just used to like, yeah, we forecast this stuff, we map it out, we know how to budget for it. For marketers, they've just been in a mode where so much of what they bought has been seat-based and essentially can be viewed as like a fixed cost independent of what they're doing. To go to a mode where now, okay, it's a smaller fixed cost, it's going to be a variable cost based on what's actually being done. It might actually be, again, more economically efficient. It might actually have better alignment with the vendor. But now you're having to sort of forecast, okay, how much am I going to need? How much should I ask for my budget for the year ahead? And this isn't terrible rocket science. I think it's just something that's relatively new to marketers. And so I think you will see this adoption happen more and more. It will become part of the playbook for good marketing ops teams, is their ability to forecast usage-based billing estimates. But Yeah, it's
One more things that marketers need to learn, right? We had to go from being creatives to being creatives and technologists and data scientists. Now we need to be financial analysts as well. You mentioned a couple times this sort of brand new world. I'm curious to dive into a little bit of what's happening with artificial intelligence. Since you could see from the top down, what are some of the AI technologies that are most commonly being adopted in this new wave of Martech?
Yeah, to me, the single most exciting thing that's happening with these LLMs, these generative AI capabilities, lots of use cases, but the one that gets me really excited is as a new interface to working with software and data. Because one of the things is Martech has gotten more and more complicated over the years. And we could optimistically say it's gotten more complicated because marketing's gotten more complicated. These tools have become more powerful. We can give it a whole bunch of good reasons. But at the end of the day, like a Martech stack and Martech products have generally become more complex, not less complex.
True.
And the user interface has had to track with that complexity where it's, okay, I have to learn these new menu options and what do I do with these radio buttons and what are the 6 steps I take. And we just reached a place where, like, for so many people, okay, wow, I can't figure that all out. You know what I mean? And you've seen some of the industry data of utilization rates dropping. It's just the software has more complexity than most human marketing teams have the bandwidth to be able to like effectively use. And in many ways, that's now actually become the limiter. Like, we can't actually make this software more sophisticated because the tree falls in the forest. There's no one around there to actually use that. All of a sudden comes along this beautiful interface available with these Gen AI technologies where, okay, if I can describe in natural language to the software what I want, have it interpret that, map it to, oh, you want a report that will show this cohort for the past 3 quarters for these 4 different campaigns. And it doesn't black box it, right? It can translate that into, oh, let me configure that report for you, give you that report with all the right configuration. You can double check, make sure, oh yeah, that is the configuration. No, I didn't want that thing, I wanted this other. But like all of a sudden now, without having to have gotten a master's degree in your reporting engine, anyone can basically unlock the power of that reporting engine. And this is super early, but you're seeing more and more throughout these Martech products of people being able to describe things in natural language and have the software figure out how to deliver that to them. And to me, first of all, that's great because it hopefully makes marketers' lives a lot easier. It's great because it lets us tap into some of this power that we're paying for, but probably for a lot of people haven't even figured out, okay, I know the product can do that, I just don't know. And if we actually get that to be almost the default interface of how we get things out of software, now you get this really wild thing where the software can actually become even more sophisticated than it had been before because we're now separating the complexity of what the software actually does behind the scenes and what for us as humans, the complexity or increasingly the simplicity of the UI.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I thought you were going to segment it into there's content, there's data, and you went a totally different direction than what I expected, which is we've got enough actual software. We don't know how to use it, actually allowing marketers to tap into and utilize their tools without needing a master's degree in how to get Salesforce to spit out your reports or whatever platform you're using, HubSpot in this case. What a relief. Also a little surprising. Are you seeing when we get into sort of the, not just like user interface getting more sort of value extracted from the existing platform, are you seeing, when you think about it from like a verticalized perspective, there being either more growth or more adoption in things like, well, the marketers are using LLMs and artificial intelligence to create their content or analyze their data or push out their marketing campaigns? What's the sort of high-level breakdown that you see on a verticalized basis?
Yeah, certainly the content generation side has been phenomenal. I think a lot of people are still pretty nervous in most cases about letting the AI just do that unchecked. But content production, right, and I'm preaching to the choir, you do this for a living. Content production is hard. It's taken a lot of effort. And so getting more and more of this next generation of AI tools that actually make it easier and easier to do more of this production and do better jobs with it, particularly if you've got someone who doesn't have a lot of specialized skills around that. They're still probably never going to be like a maestro at it just because they have AI. But boy, the difference between being completely incompetent at it to being like, oh, actually, I can passively get stuff done here. Closing that gap with those Gen AI tools, I think, has been really valuable. When you start looking at things like data analysis, in many ways, the data analysis side to me is it's a variation of what I was saying earlier about it, just a user interface. Hey, listen, before, if I wanted to figure out something about this data, odds are I had to file a ticket for some analyst to go do this, and maybe in 3 weeks they'll get back to me. And by then, actually, I've completely changed my priorities anyway, so thanks. And so I think getting better and better where like non-data scientist marketers have more and more things that they can just self-service in trying to understand what's happening with a data set. Super valuable. And then, I don't know, like
It seems like the delivery piece hasn't quite got there. Artificial intelligence isn't running a full campaign to actually publish it live. It's helping you create your content. It's helping you analyze how it performed. But the mechanism of actually getting it, and maybe there's some personalization tools, so I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. But are there tools that people are using that is about actual content delivery?
It's interesting. So the state of the art of this right now are these customer-facing agents. And there's a wide variety of them, some of which I think people are very comfortable with, which is customer service agents have gone through a generational leap where they used to be pretty bad at answering those questions. They'd have a 20% like success rate. This current generation, and you look at things like Sierra AI, there's like a whole ecosystem of these things. No, their satisfaction rate of resolving things for customers is 60, 70, 80%, and it's happening instantaneously. Customers love it. It's happy. They know it's AI, right? It's very clear.
Like, I have to push back. Hang on. 60, 70, 80%. That means 20% best case scenario of your customers are having a bad experience. I personally, I hate the customer service AI bots. They're not there yet, and I feel like we're putting walls in front of our customers, separating them from the product because we just want artificial intelligence to work. 20% bad experience is a really big number.
All right, so here's the difference between it being a bad experience and not. It's okay, if I go to a AI agent and I ask a question, here's my issue, here's my problem, can you resolve this for me? And it can resolve it for me instantaneously. Holy crap, that's actually a moment of delight. If it can't, and its immediate next step is, let me connect you with a human agent who can help you with this, then I'm not like, okay, that was a terrible experience. Now it becomes, what's happening with this human agent? And let's be honest, there's 20 years of data of this. Having human agents in customer service,
not perfect.
I don't know that we had an 80% success rate with that exactly either. So
fair. Sample size of 1, but I find the artificial intelligence-led customer service bots to be more frustrating at this stage of their development than actually talking to a person. And maybe it's just me being like, no, you're not a human, you can't answer my problem. It could just be me.
Again, this is very spiky. Like I unfortunately look at this through the lens of some of these Martech vendors who are on the cutting edge of this, and I think they've got amazing products for this, but they got to deploy it with 5 enterprise customers. And meanwhile, there's hundreds of millions of other businesses who don't have that and are probably using still earlier generation chatbots. So I don't think it's just you. I think this transition takes a long time. I think the reason I was calling it out is because I feel like the ones that are the state of the art here, I think are pointing the way towards, there are cases where the AI is actually driving the interaction. There's another set of these, frankly, on email and how handling like inbound email, and I'm not a fan of this, but how like a set of outbound emails are being orchestrated by these things. You've probably seen also some of these agents, like they have the AI SDRs and the 11X. And
I'm interviewing somebody from Qualified next week to be like, what, we got to get rid of humans? And it's like, yeah, for cold outreach, a human doesn't need to do that anyway. And I have very mixed emotions about it as well.
I also have a lot of skepticism. In fact, actually, my take on it is the more we end up automating that, the only viable outcome is going to be buyers are going to stop responding to this. As a human, I am not dealing with your friggin' agent. As a buyer, when I'm going to start, and I think we're going to see this in the not too distant future, I'm going to have my own agent. and your agent can talk to my agent, and my agent, who has true agency on my behalf, will let me know when I actually have something that, oh, this is relevant for you, this is exciting. And I say this with a little tongue in cheek, but actually, I don't think that's necessarily a bad future. I think if we could
AI
have these
gatekeepers
agents constantly negotiating opportunities, it
Scott,
could actually unlock a lot of value.
We figured out our business. Let's build AI gatekeepers. We'll use Replit to develop the whole thing, and we'll just go to a beach and hang out for a little while.
Not inconceivable, my friend.